Can you briefly tell us how you got into 3D? Why did you choose this particular direction, and what was your journey from start to finish?
The way I chose it was actually quite interesting because I originally studied to be an artist. I enrolled in college in the art department, and during my studies, I tried sculpting with clay, and I really liked it. And later, when I applied to the Lviv National Academy of Arts, I chose sculpture specifically. And there I started to develop my skills in that area further. At the same time, I started getting interested in 3D. That was exactly the time, when everyone was stuck at home during the long quarantine, and all sorts of online courses were becoming really popular then. There were courses on SMM, video editing, 3D graphics, and so on. And that was when I also started learning as well. Because at that time I had already dropped out. I dropped out about twice. I just couldn't seem to get the hang of it at all because the first time I opened it up, I saw the interface and closed it right away. The second time I opened it, I messed around a bit, but again, it just didn't work out for me. So I tried twice, and on the third attempt, I finally managed to do it. Then, about a year later, I started taking orders for monument portraits, since I was already gaining experience. By the time I reached my fourth year, I had developed the skills. I could create the entire model myself, and then it would be sent to the factory for production. It would be cut on a CNC machine, either in marble or stone, depending on the client's request. At the same time, I was also building a portfolio of character work. I originally intended to work in realism, but I soon realized that my computer could only handle semi-realism, and even then, not fully. So I ultimately decided to move more and more towards stylization. At first, I started by creating several busts, and then I attempted to build a full-fledged character. And as they say, that's how it all started. That's the very short version.
Got it. That's cool. Especially the part about how you made monuments. So, how is sculpting for game development different? Is there anything specific about it? Or maybe there was something from your previous experience that turned out to be useful from the monuments?
Well, yes, to be honest, working on that was incredibly helpful because you actually get to work from original photographs. Obviously, the person isn't sitting in front of you, they just send you photos from different angles, and you strive to do your absolute best to make the person appear as similar as possible to the photo, because after all, photography and sculpture are quite different, and there are always going to be some inherent differences. While there are some dissimilarities between the two, it really helps you train your fundamental ability to capture the core concept. That is exactly what is needed in game development. Because for creating monuments, you need a good quality model, which mostly means working with high poly counts, and that is essentially it. Basically, in that specific workflow, you obviously do not need to worry about retopologizing or texturing, but that is where I really honed my skill in achieving likeness. That was actually a really useful process for my growth.
People in the chat are saying that ZBrush is one of those cases where artists become programmers. Yeah, its interface is very different from other 3D programs.
Yes, I suppose that is true.
So what helped you master it? ZBrush?
Actually, strangely enough, it was just some random playlist of videos on YouTube, completely free ones. Not paid courses. No, no, just going on YouTube and typing in ZBrush hotkeys or ZBrush interface. Just to organize in my head structurally where everything is located. Because I watched those courses as well. And when I didn't know the interface yet, it was actually pretty difficult. Because they kind of tell you and explain exactly what to click, but in your head it's not organized at all, it's just a bit of a mess. So I just dived right in, spent some time navigating the interface, and then it was significantly more straightforward to watch other courses, especially the ones that are more advanced.
And specifically, what are the primary software applications you use? A wild black and white striped zebra.
Standard set software like ZBrush, Maya, Marmoset, and Substance Painter.
Did you actually use three-dimensional color?
This is a color I really want to try because it is actually remarkably simple and easy for hand painting. You don't have to put in a lot of effort to learn the entire process, but for some reason I just haven't quite gotten around to trying it out for myself yet. Substance is more universal, it has more features, more advanced ones, and 3D code is said to be great specifically for hand painting. So for the very next project that I work on, I'll definitely do it in 3D code.
Today, we'll walk you through the steps to create an effective new advertising campaign in Thumbtack.
Right here, I carefully took up my heavy shield, just exactly as it was left. To be honest, I haven't opened this project since I made it. It's been almost a year already. Here, I'll just take a moment to show you what my shield is actually made up of right now. And later on, I think we'll recreate the entire thing from scratch with textures in a slightly different color according to the visual reference images I've gathered, just to show the process itself. So as you can see, everything here is as simple as possible. I have a base made up of layers that fill in the primary color, the primary gradients, and 2 layers with hand-painted details. I could have merged everything into one here, but I honestly don't remember exactly why I did it on a separate layer. If I go ahead and turn off this hand paint layer right now, you can clearly see that this is basically exactly how the underlying model looks in its base state. What does this folder with the basic textures consist of? In this setup, I have an ambient occlusion layer, a light layer designed to brighten up the darkest areas, the shadows themselves, and a detailed curvature layer. Additionally, we have the essential base color layer. This represents a standard set of layers for this work, primarily because the curvature layer helps us highlight and show off all the fine detailing here. Right here with the shadows, I was going back and repeating from the concept, and I should also mention I got interrupted. Since my shield is quite shaded on that half, the second one, I tried to replicate that as much as possible. I made this kind of shadow, and accordingly it was necessary to highlight this area because there was absolutely no information here. So I added a bit more light, just a touch, and then the AO layer, which overall made the volumes more defined and separated all the details from each other a bit.
So then, where does the work on the detailed texture really start to take shape?
Well, this is basically the foundation. I always do it this way. Because at this point, there's already something to work with, even without any palette. You can already add some details, draw, highlight something. So the entire background layer is always filled in first, and then the intricate hand-painted details are added on top of it. Well, at least that's how I actually do it. Here, if you look closely, there really isn't that much hand painting. Now I'm going ahead and turning off the base. Basically, all the hand painting here is just the little details. So it's just a few final highlights and some extra fine detailing. So basically, it's mostly just the base structure for now, and today I'm going to delete all of this much more precisely. I'll group it into a completely separate folder and then try to redo it all from scratch using a slightly different reference image for better results. I decided to take a quick break here, added a few more details, spent some time discussing the color, and now I'm going to create, for example, this arcane mask using those identical colors. I'll try to achieve the same level of detail. I think it'll be interesting. So, where do I start? We can immediately create a folder where everything will be stored. All right, and let's create the first layer. This will be our base color. Let's open up the reference I picked with the mask right away. We'll be picking colors from it.
If you have any questions at all, you can type them into the chat box. I'll pass them along as we go. If I don't get to some of them, you can add them during the Q&A session at the very end.
So first I'm creating the base color. I'm looking for a color on our reference that isn't a highlight and isn't a shadow. In other words, something neutral. I actually think this one will be very suitable for our shield. Right after this, I create, let's label this item right away. Immediately after completing this step, I am going to create a specific color that will really help to emphasize all of our fine details. Using a black mask, I will add the curvature generator and then I'll tweak the settings a bit so that only the sharpest lines remain. These lines are perfect because they clearly show the subtle bends of the underlying forms. By the way, this is a fantastic way to evaluate how you constructed the high poly model in the first place. Because, for example, looking at it now, I really feel like this shield is missing some of those crucial thin elements. So there are some main ones, but here, for example, it's very empty. In this particular area, I'd like to spend a little more time working on this, specifically on the high poly. So we carefully adjust it roughly to how we like it. And after doing that, I usually pick a specific color, something that is not too shiny or reflective, for example, something exactly like this. And then, based on that choice, I can tweak it a little bit more later on. And right away, as I was working, I have recently discovered that you can, and actually should, reduce the opacity level just a little bit. Because when you add a new layer, in these specific areas where it shows up, it completely covers the texture underneath. And everything underneath it won't be visible, so always lower it a bit, the opacity. So we've added it, but maybe it's still too intense. We'll tweak it slightly later on. Let's just make a note of that here. Now, for the very next layer, let's go ahead and add some bright light. I really want to add some extra light right here in this section. And finally, for now, let's go ahead and call this layer light. I always prefer to choose the specific color a bit later on because right now it is still pretty easy to see exactly where the light is hitting. If we try to adjust the color right now, it probably won't end up looking very good at all. That's why we do the color at the end. I'm adjusting it the same way so that our shield, if we look at the original reference, we can see that half of the shield is in shadow. So just to make it more interesting, let's do the same thing. For this next step in the process, we'll add light only on one specific side. Let's carefully adjust the brightness levels a bit and pick out the right color, focusing on the color choice. I'll probably use the same color I picked for the previous layer, but I'm going to make this one a bit darker than before, just like this, and then accordingly we will work on adjusting the shadow to match the new lighting. We'll do the same thing now. We'll make the shadow in a similar way, just adding some shading on the other side. Something like this, and just a bit. Let's also turn down the brightness level. Oh, I forgot to decrease the opacity settings here, so adjusting the shadow effect. We'll take it from somewhere around here as well. Maybe we can even deepen the shade to make it darker. And we can also adjust the overall tone a little bit to add a more purplish hue. Maybe. By the way, when you're choosing colors here, you might notice people's skin tones end up looking a bit muddy or dirty when hand painting skin. This often happens because we tend to pick a specific color directly from the color spectrum. For example, let's look at this color right here. And when we need a darker color, we usually just select it a bit lower. But because of this, the saturation level increases quite a bit more. This mix with the darker values makes the final result come out looking very muddy and dull. So whenever you change the color to a significantly darker one, you should always shift it a bit diagonally across the color picker to keep the tones clean. That is, if it's from here, then a little down and a little to the side to add saturation, and the color won't be as muddy. Then, for example, the face will look more lively. I'm not sure if it will be clearly visible on the sample here. If I pick this color and that color, you see it moves a bit diagonally after all. Not much. Right away you see, I also picked a light one, and it also went diagonally to the side. So right away, just so I don't have to go back and do it later, if you decide to change the color, just move your brush diagonally over to the side. Now, since I have already spent some time picking out those specific colors a bit earlier in the process, I'll make it a bit darker after all and I'll do it. Maybe something more like this one. All right then, and let's also go ahead and get started on doing it right now, shall we? And let's also make a little gradient, one gradient using position. Let's invert it now and adjust exactly where it's going to be. Let's say, for example, something like this and like that, and then we'll pick a nice color for it, something dark. But let's choose a straight up purple for it. Maybe some interesting shade like this. I really like this one. Yeah, and just a little bit more. Let's go ahead and lower the opacity and adjust the overall transparency. All right, that's it. That's basically it. Oh, and the AO, I almost forgot. Now let's look at the ambient occlusion pass. By processing it through the generator and adjusting the ambient settings, we can invert the values. Right here, it's interesting to see how I captured this detail, which forms a distinct star-like shape. At this moment, looking at the AO, you can see it is very clearly separated from the base of the shield structure. And I want to keep that look. I really want to emphasize it. So I'll leave it right at about this level, and then I'll pick the darkest color that's available there, like this one. This is basically our base, which we can already work with further. You can still take a moment to move around the space, start applying various colors to the canvas, and select a few slightly different shades if you feel they are needed. If not, you can just proceed forward with the current selection.
It looks nice. And what exactly in particular is it considered to be more preferable than form on this base? At the beginning, what has the greatest impact on the final quality?
On the final quality, probably it's the arrangement of the colors. That is, this gradient is very often used in stylization. It probably depends on the project. For example, if you have a game where the character will be very far from the camera, we can already see that in principle it's fine. Maybe you can emphasize the AO even more, darken it further, or add more light. This needs to be set up at this stage because it's our base. We'll be painting on top of it so that later we don't get confused, have to go back or completely repaint everything. Hand painted. We place the main colors in their proper spots according to the requirements of your project or your goals. So basically that's it. I still feel like there's a bit of lighting missing, so maybe I'll adjust it a little, even make it like this. Following our spectrum, yellow and purple, we then immediately apply this spectrum to our work. Yellow, purple, or orange, you can also make it a bit greenish. So now we're going to start the painting process, and there is just one more thing to consider, especially when you change the color, for example, the lighting setup. We have this curve tool right here, so do we also need to adjust this specific color a bit? If it happens to differ too much from the rest, I mean, it's not absolutely critical for us right now, but I would still recommend that we tweak it just a little bit to be safe. Try to move it a little bit closer to that one. That is basically all there is to it. Now you can go ahead and create a simple regular layer, and we will begin the process of painting on it. As for the brushes, there is no big secret here either, just the most basic standard brushes. Let me take a moment to try and find them for you right now. If I recall correctly, it was actually called something very much like this. It was known as the knife painting soft technique. Yes, that is definitely the one I was thinking of earlier today. This is the brush, though you can't really see it. There's nothing particularly special or unusual here. I'll slightly decrease the flow a bit down to the level of 5 or 6, and we'll get started. I would start from the very center, or right from this spot. So let's pick a color, something like this. And we'll slowly start painting it in. By the way, if you are currently painting and you happen to get this kind of smooth gradient, it is much better not to overblend it right here. So you can see it just a little bit better. Mine starts off very sharply, but whenever I make these brush strokes and need to soften that particular area a bit, I never use my finger or try to smudge it manually. I just pick a color somewhere here in the middle, and then I just paint over it with the same kind of brush strokes like this. You can do the same thing from the other side, because otherwise it just creates some kind of messy, unclear smudge. You might touch some neighboring brush strokes and it will look unattractive. But this way, you just pick a color, and you can choose a lighter one or a darker one. And you create these smooth gradients, nice and neat. Missed the color pick. There we go. That's roughly how I'll be working with all the brush strokes where it's needed.
So what is the secret to making these brushstrokes look so beautiful, really artistic?
I think the real key here is to make them much more substantial. Because sometimes I tend to notice that when people are texturing their models, they often make a great deal of tiny, repetitive brushstrokes. Of course, they're justified in certain places, like for detailing. But now I will try to model this particular situation for you. So imagine a lot of tiny, delicate, and small brushstrokes, and they look almost as if you were drawing carefully with a sharp pencil. That is not necessarily a bad thing to do, of course, but it just ends up looking a bit odd and unusual in this style. That is, the brush strokes are layered on top of each other, and in those areas they become even thinner. That's why I always try to make the brush strokes a bit larger. Larger and only use the really fine strokes for some specific detailing, but not for the color itself. I didn't quite understand what I picked up and why was I focusing on the color. Actually, I wasn't focusing on it at all. That's why I always try to first lay down some large patches of the primary colors of the piece, like I did on the panel, though there I was copying from a reference, but still. So I start with substantial large patches and big spots, and only later in the detailing phase do I add some tiny details. This helps group them together a bit, so they don't look scattered or completely out of place, and there aren't too many of them. So that's more or less the way how I do it. And also regarding this tip about blending, don't overwork them, just make sure to choose the right ones for the piece. Your color choices should be chosen diagonally across the color spectrum, not just simply going down. If it's darker, go up. If it's lighter, then it will appear more natural. And still, make accents only where they're needed. For example, I could make this whole edge really bright, but that wouldn't look good. You always need to use less in some places. Somewhere you need to break it up more often, like here. See, there's a chip somewhere in the center, and this edge is highlighted closer to it. But where it's farther away, the line becomes thinner and breaks up, and it's the same in this direction. Of course, there are some spots on the metal that require a straight line, like here, for example. Right here, it's perfectly straight because the light falls evenly, and you can do it this way, but still, when we studied painting, we were taught that there shouldn't be any long line or long stroke, especially in sculptural composition. It should always be broken up and divided somehow. In this case, it's interrupted by this small scratch mark here. In the same way, in our own work, we also will generally avoid making this entire light area go the full length. I'm just thinking only about this spot right here. Now I would like to make this shield significantly more intricate and detailed than the one I did earlier. I'll try adding some additional battle-worn scratches and scuff marks now to give it more character. Let's start from the bottom and add some colors. Let's carefully select some appropriate shades from this palette right here. We can add some accents like this, darker ones. But we have warm and cool tones. Now let's try to bring out some of that lovely purple color. To make it more interesting. Yes, honestly, that is already more than enough. You can apply this kind of patch immediately and efficiently to other areas. So you don't have to keep going back and forth constantly. You can add it to various other locations on your canvas right away. Here, for example, you can put a big patch exactly like this one. Later on, you can incorporate and blend in, I don't know, maybe a slightly more vibrant and reddish hue. And engage in creative experimentation. That is, explore techniques similar to those used by painters, if that is your style, or perhaps something interesting like that. For instance, right here in this area, you can easily add a very bold red spot. And from here, I'll probably take another color and add some subtle highlights underneath this section, these areas.
And you previously recommended making much bolder brushstrokes. How exactly can you make them appear more confident and intentional? Beginners often struggle with making these types of confident strokes. They frequently doubt whether a specific mark truly belongs here or fits the piece.
There's really nothing to be afraid of because we always have our friend Stylized, and you can always fix everything, paint over it again. If you like a particular area, if it's interesting, you can of course duplicate the layer and then use a mask to keep only that part and continue painting and experimenting with the rest. Because, well, I don't know, I don't have that kind of fear. So, you try something, add something, and if you don't like it, you can just paint over it, choose another color, or on the contrary, pick a lighter one. Because, well, in sculpture, if you're carving a sculpture out of stone, a big one, and you hit it wrong somewhere, make a mistake, and half of your work breaks off, then there's nothing you can do to fix it. That's when it can be scary. But since we have the ability to correct things, just don't be afraid. With time, it will come. Over time, you'll work more confidently. There won't be such problems. For example, if we have some other elements on the shield, you can also look closely at what colors are present so you can reflect them as well as a kind of reflection. So, for example, if we have a jug, hold on a second, if we have a jug in the painting and we're painting it and there's a lemon next to it, then naturally there will be a little yellow spot on the jug. The lemon will reflect onto it, and similarly, if there are any, I don't know, accessories hanging on the shield or something attached to it, or if there's some kind of metallic ring, it will naturally reflect light and cast it onto the shield itself. So this is something you can also take into account in your work. Whenever we are working with various colors, it is important to ensure that we do not make our final model look too monotone. So yes, we choose different colors, but to have them in different tonalities in black and white, that's already a bit more complicated. That's why we create a new layer for this. Right here, we carefully apply a filter. Next, we set the mode to pass out. And within the filter, we adjust the saturation slider all the way down to 0. And now our model is in black and white. And we can see that overall it turned out pretty well. Of course, the left and right sides are a bit too similar. That is, here in theory, she should have been completely in shadow. We can tweak it a bit more, just that base layer itself. But we can see that, for example, these bright areas remain bright. And here, by the way, it's quite a flat area, although I tried to add a bit more green in the colors here and a bit darker here. You can refine this area so that it conveys more information with different colors. Here the colors aren't very noticeable either. You can only see it from this side. Although down here there is some blue and red. In a simple black and white view, they look exactly the same. The blue stands out quite clearly, so you should also pay close attention to these specific moments and always make sure to check them with this filter. Or if your model is visually interesting and not entirely flat in the black and white spectrum, you might see more detail.
But these details here, well, right now, this detailing that you recreate, the effect it helps to achieve,
Which exactly you have.
at this moment on the highest section of the crystal, this visible ending?
I'll try to convey this subtle transition now, exactly where it is. The gradual transition of this light, like right here, for example, to clearly show the bend of the volume, and to demonstrate that this little detail here is actually bent. Here you can also see how the light falls specifically on this part and then it gets darker. The same goes for the shadows. So with the shadow, I'm also showing here that my little detail is slightly bent. It's concave, it's not flat. Maybe I'll show it somewhere else now since I have some samples here. Or maybe even right here. Well, something like this, like with the light here, but with the shadows, to incorporate a touch of educational, fascinating, more and truly informative bends. So now I'll try to add different colors here, but at the same time, so that they look good in black and white, so that the difference between them is also visible. Yes, where the color is. You can also choose to go with something slightly darker, or perhaps even a bit smaller. Well, right now it looks very painterly, but I'm exaggerating a bit just to make it clearer. And then, when you already have some large masks laid out, you can start adding details. This screenshot provides a very clear demonstration of how the metal is deteriorating and crumbling away right here. It would be very interesting to try to faithfully replicate this rust and the peeling paint on this side. Let's create some nice lighting here. We can see there's a shadow there, quite a distinct one. Let's try to create it now. In some specific areas, we can make the shadows much more pronounced, especially right here where it first starts. Let us try it out now. Here is some visible rust. Let us try. Maybe pick a specific color like this one. I think I will make it pure white on the very inside. So right now it looks like gold leaf, but here it will be silver. Let's try to apply the main color now. Blend it out like this. And let's try something white.
Why is the approach different in texturing for rendering and texturing for game engines?
For rendering, you can set a higher resolution, you can make a higher quality texture in 4K and even higher. But for games, of course, optimization is important and everything revolves around that. There are limitations on the polygon count or on tris. Some systems count by vertices. And accordingly, the texture is also for the game. For example, if the model is like in League of Legends, meaning it will be seen from this distance, then, well, textures aren't that important. You don't need such detailed ones, and what I'm doing now, the main thing here is this gradient, because everything there is pretty simple, just in the style. And that's it, just add some basic details and it'll be fine. If it's for your portfolio, then of course you do whatever you want there. Depending on your personal goals, you can choose to make it significantly more detailed. And if you've set some kind of specific challenge for yourself, you also try to reflect that in your work. So that is how the process works. Here, for example, you could have made more polygons right here on top. It's the same with that girl I made. I also needed to add a few more polygons. After all, I was making it for my portfolio, not for a game, so there were no limits there. Yeah, so everything is the same. As for the specific engines, there might be different technical requirements because if it's for a game, depending on the engine, it could involve a different production pipeline, meaning you would need different texture maps for Unreal Engine. In that case, for example, you can create a kind of hybrid setup. You can, for instance, insert the ambient occlusion data into the alpha channel of a base texture or perhaps the transparency map. This way, instead of having to manage 5 separate maps, you only have 3 total, so you can just adjust the settings as needed for your project. Regarding the visual requirements, I am going to demonstrate for you one particular filter that effectively helps us accurately determine whether our model isn't too golden dark. Once you have imported the shield model into the game engine, in our specific case, there is a tool available. I will demonstrate it for you right now, located right here. It is called a validator, specifically a PBR validator. Let us go ahead and drop it in here, right on top of the stack, and you will see that it highlights certain problematic areas for us in a red color, just like this. These sections are the areas that are far too dark, and once they are in the engine, they will look very pronounced. They will really stand out. So it's always best to carefully avoid such red highlighted areas. Right now, my stylus is a bit old, and I can't really catch the button properly anymore. So which areas do we need to avoid? So green and yellow-orange colors are allowed. This one is more or less okay, definitely better than red, but the best are yellow and green. All right, let's take a look now. Here we have the AO map. I think we can tweak it a bit, maybe lighten it up. All right, right now I have a 4K texture. Let me maybe reduce it a bit, down to 100. There, I brightened it up a little. I have adjusted the AO map settings, and now the red color has completely disappeared. Let me bring it back for you, and there it is once again. So, try to make these specific areas at least a bit more yellowish, and let's see how the final result looks. Well, nothing has changed drastically, but the model already looks better. Because even if you turn it back like this, you can see it's a bit dark, but it's not critical. You can see it like this with the validator. Aha, got it. It didn't just freeze. Substance. So we can see even without the validator that the color is too dark. Accordingly, we can lighten it up a bit as needed, turn on the validator and check. If everything is green, then everything is perfect. Well done. You can pass it on to the animation team.
Does this poor rendering actually show up in the final output? Specifically these strange black spots?
It really depends on how the graphics are specifically set up, but for example, in these very black areas, where you simply can't see any color at all, because it's just very dark, like right here, it's just a solid black spot where nothing is visible. Sometimes they also check the ambient occlusion map or AO map to see if it's too dark. Let's go ahead and turn on our AO map now and take a closer look. Ours in principle doesn't have very dark areas, only in those places where it was dark. Over there in some engines. This also makes the work look much darker and it doesn't look good. That is exactly the reason why even during the baking process, there are settings in the standard settings menu where you can slightly reduce this, I mean the intensity of the black color. I can't quite recall the name exactly, but in the settings where ambient occlusion is, you actually click on the gear icon. There will be some sliders there and the middle slider. You can move it and it will adjust these. The black areas will only appear where there's detail, so it won't blur them as much. They'll be more sharply outlined around the objects. I also didn't know this when I was working on this project, so I did it the way I knew how. So we checked it, and that's it. We also check on, in the black and white spectrum, you can kind of see the difference here. And we keep working like this, constantly double checking ourselves.
I was wondering if you could put together a comprehensive checklist of the specific elements to check in a texture before exporting it.
It's mainly about these visual aspects, making sure nothing is off anywhere. If you want, you can set a much higher resolution here and check if anything is overlapping anywhere. It is possible you have some extra spots on your layers somewhere. Well, it is quite hard to notice that in Paint, but it is still definitely worth checking. Sometimes I also turn on only the metallic maps if we have them and check if there are any spots. Right now, for some reason, I have a spot here. I don't know where it came from. These specific kinds of spots should also be thoroughly cleaned up so that our map is clean. If we are not currently using metallic or roughness maps and we still see this spot here, we can also take the time to clean it up properly. Or maybe it ended up on some other objects. It got in where it shouldn't be. You can just click through and check. And basically that's it. Just check everything with these validators and you're done.
I would really like to ask you, what specific advice would you like to give to all the SQS students who are currently learning the art of texturing?
I would really like to wish them quite a bit, actually not just a little bit, but a whole lot of creative inspiration to go out and explore. I mean, the course itself is very good, of course, but there is so much more to see. But besides the course, also take time to look at the works of other artists. Take time to explore this topic because, well, we continue to learn throughout our entire lives. And in fact, you should really enjoy it. So enjoy the whole process. Explore, constantly develop yourself, and by doing this, you will always gain a little more than others, especially more than those who choose not to put in the effort. After finishing school and university, it might often seem to us that, oh, learning is just incredibly tedious. Well, you really have to try to make the process of learning much more interesting for yourself. Just like you came to this course because you're interested in the topic, you want to become professional 3D artists and you start exploring this subject in depth. You learn something in one specific course, something entirely different in another, and I truly wish you both patience and curiosity in your studies. So, can I show you something interesting now?
Yes, you can.
Alright, so I've gathered a few artists here whose color choices are really interesting. This first artist, you can take a screenshot, write down the name, and look them up later. Their artworks have beautifully chosen colors, really beautiful both in terms of color spectrum and tonality. You can even just download a picture from here, make a palette from it, and then use it to texture your own characters. Next up is a Chinese artist. I'm really not sure how you'll find their work. Your iPhone could help later. Reads text,
Looking at just the first letter, it looks most like a B.
I have no idea. He has really cool concepts. You can basically create a character directly from them. Now, the colors are selected with great care. They harmonize together quite beautifully. He has a remarkably striking, sharp style. You can also just download and pick colors directly from their works. So for example, in this work, see here, this little gray detail, it might seem like, well, it's just gray, just a detail. What's there to texture? But he added a lot to it. He used a bunch of colors, and it's the same in his other works, like over there or on the body. For example, this one. He also has shadows that are cool toned and the light is warm. There are also a lot of different colors on the clothes, on the body, on the metal, on the hair. And here you can use it as a reference for how he textures things. Well, of course, he's a 2D artist, but you can still pick up some tricks from him. And
Does he boldly add colors?
yes, he's not afraid. That was the question, whether to be afraid or not. We work in a field where you can always redo everything, so there's nothing to be afraid of. Regarding 3D artists, honestly, I don't know who to recommend specifically, so I'd suggest you go with your own preferences. For example, I like the style of Bifiner, so I just go to ArtStation and type in Bifiner. And then I just look for any models I like, open them up, and simply study how they're made, how the textures work in them, If it's in Marmoset Viewer, you can even rotate it, which is just awesome. You can see how they work with textures, what they add, what they don't add. So I can't really recommend any one specific here. Just go in, open up anyone's work, and take a look. And by the way, about colors, let me give you a couple of links. There are some really good websites for colors. I'll probably add some of them to Discord after the stream. I'll just show you how they work. So here's the first site. It's called Gradient. It's more for UI. So it's used for different websites, but you can also scroll through it here. You can look at different galleries, choose some custom option for your character, or pick a more general one. The second site is a palette. Take a look at this color spectrum wheel where you can easily select matching complementary colors. As you see here in the picture, colors look good when they are either positioned directly opposite each other or when they are connected in these specific modes. I will show you how this works now just for a moment, so it will be clear. So, we have a spectrum and we choose which color we need. Here, it automatically identifies a palette of colors that complement each other perfectly. You can also choose to switch to a different spectrum so that these specific points that pick the color are positioned significantly further apart from each other. You can also rotate and choose, even up to 4 points. You can set it yourself, make it lighter or darker. So it's actually a very good site for these specific purposes. You can certainly use it yourself. As for the articles, well, on level 80, you can, of course, find a lot of info about that same Wayfinder game there. Here's the title of the article there as well. We'll attach the link later. Regarding the character, I found some kind of guide for you here. Here it's all about the high poly, which is just as important as the textures. Because all of this you extract later with generators. From the high poly itself to the textures. And there's also a really cool sword. I also have it saved in my collection of samples. Here it also shows how he made it here. You can read and take a look. Phew, that's it. Seems like I've said everything.
That's a pretty solid and useful list. We'll find a dedicated place on the Discord server to share these resource links for you all. We should have it somewhere with the resources.
One moment.
By the way, just what you shared is very helpful and valuable. We have many users who speak English, and they should find such English language websites likely to be very beneficial.
Well, now let's see here.
Yeah, I agree. That sounds really good. Then let's wrap things up. Once again, let me kindly remind you to check the description below and follow all the latest announcements. Furthermore, I would like to personally invite you to collaborate with the VSQUAD School. If you are also interested in participating in the stream as a special guest, please feel free to write to us at any time. You can also write if you want to have your own course. Published on the VSQUAD platform. We are open to collaboration, so that's all. Thank you to everyone who stayed until the end. Goodbye, everyone.
And bye. Thank you for your attention.